Hi everyone, this is Jono and welcome to another one of my videos. This one is part of my series for the Open Org and you can find out more about that lovely group of people in the video description. Now, as part of these videos that I do for the Open Org as well as some other videos, I'm usually talking about methods, approaches and techniques for how to do effective community leadership or broader leadership in organizations that's typically pretty open and transparent. But today I want to talk about a subject that I think affects pretty much every organization and beyond, and that is how you deal with difficult personalities. Now, we've all seen this. You may have a founder or a CEO, member of the executive team who is kind of difficult to be with, dominant, unclear in what they want, maybe aggressive at times in how they approach the team. And you may see a similar personality either in the team that you're in or team that you have to work with, or even someone like that who works for you if you're a manager. We also see this, of course, outside of work. We see this in our families and with our friends. So I want to talk about some approaches that I've used over the years to try to handle this, because I think a lot of people who don't handle it very well, they just get frustrated and then it tends to build divisions between people, and that can cause complexities in your friendships, in your families, and in your careers. So today I'm really going to delve into this, and one thing I want to make very clear is that this is about how to deal with difficult people who you want to have a relationship with. Now, of course, there's a whole load of people out there on the internet and elsewhere who are trolls, who are bigots, who are racists, who are sexists, and all that kind of stuff. We don't want anything to do with that. This is not about dealing with them. This is about building productive relationships with people who might be a little difficult to deal with. Now, to start at the beginning, I believe a chunk of this is about understanding our sphere of influence. So in everything that we do, there are things that we have control over, and there are things that we don't. So to give you an example, I run my own business. I'm a consultant. I help companies build communities. There's many things within my business that are within my control. I can control what services I offer, who I decide to work with, what my pricing looks like, how professional and how brand consistency and professionalism and all that kind of stuff that I have. But there are many things that are outside of my control. I can't control the market. I can't control other people's budgets. I can't control what people do with the information that I give them when I'm working with a client. So if you don't understand what's within your influence and what's outside of your influence, and you just consider the world to be one place, that can generate an enormous amount of anxiety. Whereas, it's healthy to often say, this thing is outside of my influence, therefore I'm going to forget about it and focus on other things. Now, closely related to that, a big chunk of, I think, how we deal with difficult people is to really focus on building trust and respect. There are people who may have difficult personalities, radically different viewpoints, who you can actually have a very productive relationship if you have a foundation of trust and respect. Now, the way in which we do that is to first of all understand that people offer their trust in very different ways. So there will be some of you, for example, and if you meet someone, you kind of get on well and within next to no time, you can already have a sense of trust and respect for them. But some of you, for example, it may take hours or days or weeks or months or even years to build trust in people. Some people hold their trust cards a lot closer to their chest. So it's good to get a sense of where people stand in that regard, because that gives you a sense of how much trust you need to focus on and building. Now, the other element here is that in every room, in every meeting, there is a power exchange. There are certain people who will be in a higher position of power, both informally and formally, than other people. So the classic example here is if you go for a job interview. If I was to go for a job interview with you and you're hiring me, you're in a position of power. Like, I want your job to a reasonable extent. And in the vast majority of situations where you have an interview like that, this becomes a little less so the more executive someone gets, because it's less an interview and more of just a general discussion. But if it's a formal interview, then it changes the dynamic of the room quite a lot. Typically, people who are in less power often feel a lot more self-conscious and a lot more uncomfortable. So the key thing here is that we want to hold our own in those situations. So typically, if someone's more difficult, people will often tap dance around them. We want to hold our own and match their power, but we also want to offer our vulnerability in being receptive to feedback, because it's the offering of vulnerability and being open to feedback that actually builds trust. So you hold your own in terms of the power, but then you also build the trust in terms of having a discussion, and a collaboration. Okay? That's the crux, the kind of the outer edges of what we want to accomplish. Now, as you do this, I think there are a number of golden rules that we should think about, and I want to run through these real quick before we go into some approaches to doing this. The first element is never personalize the issue. This is when things get bad. I see this all of the time on Facebook, where I've got friends who come from different sides of the political aisle, and they'll start debating healthcare or tax or trade or whatever it might be, the issue of the day. And then it won't take long before someone will start personalizing something. They'll say, well, that's just typical of you for X reason, or they'll attack someone's looks or their weight or their experience, or they'll accuse them of being a racist or a sexist or a bigot in some form or shape or fashion. This is when this starts happening, when people personalize things, it makes everything infinitely more complicated. And more people are likely to personalize it than you might think. So always try to take the high ground in here. Focus on the content of their argument. Attack the idea. Don't attack the person is what a lot of people say. But we don't want to attack anything. We just want to understand them. That's the number one goal here. And this kind of gets into the second golden rule, which is listening objectively. Listen to the words. Try to avoid the emotion, because there are many different things that can cloud somebody's articulation of some things. Like some people are just less experienced at articulating their ideas or their concerns or their perspectives. And sometimes people can focus on the way that information is transmitted as opposed to the information itself. So really focus on those words. If someone sounds agitated or arrogant or frustrated, try to avoid that and get to the heart of what they're trying to accomplish and at the heart of what the issue is. And what's very closely related to that is the third one, which is evaluate the other externalities that may be happening. So, for example, if you're dealing with someone who's being very difficult, and it's the couple of weeks leading up to a new release or a product announcement, then it's probably stress is doing a lot of the talking. But there may be other things. You just don't know whether that person, for example, has been diagnosed with a disease or has got, somebody in their life is ill, or they just broke up with their family, or whatever it might be. Who knows? So a certain element of this, I think, is giving someone the benefit of the doubt. If you really focus on their words and try to avoid those externalities and just focus on the content of their message, then it helps to also avoid the temptation of personalizing the issue. Now, the fourth element in terms of a golden rule here as well, which I think is really important, is the way in which we build trust is not with words. Okay, politicians try to do that. They give you a lot of this in the aim that you'll have faith in their words, and off you go. The way in which we build trust is with action. It's with demonstrating that you are a person of your word and you will follow through on the things that you've said you're going to follow through on. If you don't do that, if you constantly make promises and don't deliver on them, then it will not only stop trust from brewing, it'll actually generate the seeds of mistrust. And that's obviously something we don't want. And then the final thing, the fifth golden rule here, is this takes time and it takes practice, right? You're not going to get good at this immediately. I don't consider myself necessarily an expert in this, and it's taken me 20 years to get to the point that I've got to. Now, your journey may be shorter, it may be longer. Who knows? And I'm not doing this I'm not spending my entire waking day focused on this, obviously. There's way more interesting and important things to focus on. But it does take time. And look at everything you do in this area as an opportunity to learn. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So, in a nutshell, where we are so far, understand your sphere of influence, that there's a lot you can do when dealing with difficult personalities. Really focus on trust and respect. Understand and hold your power when you're dealing with these kinds of personalities, but offer your vulnerability to have a discussion. Don't become defensive like a lot of people do. And then do not personalize the issue. Focus on the words and try to avoid the externalities. And then focus on building this trust and respect with action and not just words, okay? And bear in mind that this takes time. So that's where we are so far. Now, there are two scenarios in which you typically tend to deal with these kinds of difficult personalities. The first are short-term issues. Somebody gets pissed off and frustrated and they vent, or they've just been difficult to work with, but you probably already know them and you know that they're not usually like that and they're generally okay. Or you don't know them, but other people may say, I don't know, they're just being difficult right now. But whatever it might be, there's a short-term issue. The second type of person are chronically difficult people. And sadly, we see, I mean, one of my areas of experience here, working with so many different companies, is every single company has got people like this. There are no exceptions. There are no companies where you don't have difficult people. And if you're saying my company doesn't, well, if that's genuinely the case, I think you're an exception, and that's great. Keep on hiring like that way. But there may be the possibility that other people find certain personalities difficult that you're unaware of, okay? Look, people are people, and you're going to have more amenable people and more difficult people, and you just got to be able to figure out these interpersonal issues. Now, with the short-term issues, the good news about that is there's relatively little risk, is that if somebody's being difficult, you can try to address the issue following the method I'm going to go through in a second, and then usually it kind of ends, people go back to normal, and let bygones be bygones. The difficult thing with the second type of folks, who are more like chronically difficult to work with, is often people will A, become resentful and they'll personalize things, but B, sometimes people just don't want to deal with them. They're like, I don't want to work with you. Like, I'd rather go and work somewhere else and not have to deal with that kind of personality for whatever reason. So there's a much higher risk to an organization if you don't manage those types of folks. Now, there are many, many different considerations to think in this, and typically what tends to happen with people who are chronically difficult, the second type, is that if they're in a position of leadership, typically you'll have a group of people who wrap around them like a glove and insulate the rest of the organization from them. And that's a reasonable idea because you essentially limit the blast furnace. But I would encourage you to go through what I'm talking about here and apply that to both of these types of scenarios. And bear in mind that it's a work in progress and it's something you're going to need to work on pretty consistently. So how do we do this? Well, I think the first thing we need to do is to go through an assessment, like whether it's a short-term issue or dealing with a longer-term personality. The first thing is that we need to evaluate the root causes, like the root cause of why they're being difficult to work with. Because in many cases, one of the things I've learned over the years is that when people say there is a problem, the actual problem is often not that it's a deeper issue that lives underneath the surface. And what they're actually reacting to is a symptom. And this is really about understanding that person very deeply and being honest and, again, vulnerable in how you approach them, is not using your own biases to understand them, but to really say, like, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, what is the root cause of this? And it could be insecurity, it could be fear, it could be all kinds of different things. Because when we evaluate and understand those root causes, we can then use that as material that we can use to deal with it. So to give you an example, one guy for a company who I've worked with was just very difficult to deal with. People didn't particularly like him. He was aggressive. He was constantly complaining. Very rarely gave any positive validation. Was uber critical all of the time. Would often be agitated and frustrated, and people would talk about him behind his back and be frustrated with him. And people just didn't want to work with him. And when I worked with that personality and did a bit of coaching with him, I got to the root cause of the fact that he had an enormous amount of fear and a decent amount of ego, because he was worried that the company was going to fail and therefore he would look stupid. So his ego combined with a fear was generating this, and he didn't really understand that he was having this negative effect on people. So when we identified those issues, we were able to work with them. And the second piece of this is once you have that repair phase, is then understand what I'd call the build phase. Like, what are their motivations? So with this guy, for example, he's just really huge fan of software, really wanted to build something, support his family, but also build a business that everybody felt happy with. He wanted people to be happy. He just didn't realize he wasn't particularly good at it, and therefore was actually kind of heading in the wrong direction. So we identified the issues as well as the motivations. And then the third component here is to identify how that person likes to work in terms of time and communication. Now, the reason why I say this is because in many cases, people who are difficult are frustrated because they're frustrated with either the way in which people manage their time or the way in which people communicate with each other. There are people, for example, who will get upset when people get into work 10 minutes late. There are people who are upset because they're late to meetings. There are people who are upset because they missed a deadline. Okay? There are people who get upset on the communication side because they don't communicate quickly, effectively enough, or they send swathes of text to them, or they don't provide the right kind of information, or they don't include the right kinds of people. So understand how they manage their time and their communication. So at this point, you have a sense of what are their root causes about why they're behaving this way, what are the motivations, what do they want to accomplish, and then how do they prefer to manage their time and communicate. This gives us some super valuable information that we can deal with, and this is how I like to apply the method here. The first element here is that when we see these situations, is that we immediately respond as a listener. Is instead of going there and again personalizing the issue, we say, okay, I know you're frustrated. Tell me more. Like, what is it? And this is often a good time when you can do that assessment. You can get to that root cause, understand the motivations, understand how they'd like to communicate with in terms of time and communication. So first things first, but be a listener. Don't pass judgment, just listen, let them get it off their chest, okay? Now the second element here is to then immediately respond with short-term wins and execute. This is really important. So, if someone's been difficult, even if you kind of think they're being a bit of an asshole about things, right? Listen to them, identify those issues, like objectively, unemotionally, and then respond immediately. Do something. So, for example, if somebody's frustrated about that there wasn't enough communication about a particular project and that caused a problem, okay, well, I will send you a weekly reports email summary, a couple of bullet points, or we'll pencil in more calls. Or I will put together a group report from the team and we'll get that to you and we'll schedule in a call with a Q&A session. Whatever it might be, but demonstrate immediate wins that you can execute in the next 2 weeks, okay? What that does is that demonstrates that you're receptive and you've internalized their concerns and you're acting immediately. Remember, that's where we build trust and respect. We build it with action, not just with words, okay? The third thing that we then focus on is starting a longer conversation to build rigor. So once you've started putting those initial things in place to deal with the issue, usually what will happen now is the person we're talking about will tend to calm down and things will start getting back to normal, okay? But then what it often does is it doesn't deal with the root causes. So schedule a call with them and say, I identified some of these root causes with your frustration, or with how you're, why we've got this kind of dynamic between us. I want to discuss some longer term solutions to how we can avoid this from happening. And that can often be things such as better project management in an organization. It could be identifying ways in which you can have a more frank and open relationship with them. It could be a few more sanity checks before you make decisions on various things. There are lots and lots of different ways in which you can do that. But what you're doing here with this method is you're first of all you're neutralizing the situation by being a listener and gathering that information. You're demonstrating immediate short-term wins. So you're demonstrating receptivity to the problem and starting to build trust immediately. And then you're saying, I don't think this is enough. I think we can do even better. I think we can go one step further. Okay? So that's kind of the approach that I tend to use. Again, I just want to reiterate, this all takes practice. And you're probably watching this and we're like 19 minutes in or whatever, and you're thinking, that's good, Jono, but I need something more specific. I sadly can't offer you like super specific guidance because it really depends on your scenario and what you're doing. But if you walk through the things that I've mentioned here, I'm 100% confident it will have a significant impact in how you can improve the situation. But as you go through this, there'll be certain scenarios when you try this and you apply this and it doesn't work. And see, every complicated relationship, and whether you're successful in this approach or whether you're unsuccessful in this approach, is an opportunity to rehearse. It reminds me of when I used to play my band in the UK, and we used to we toured around the UK, and we'd have some shows that were packed and some shows that was barely anyone there. And what we always said to ourselves was, even if there's one person there, or if there's no one there, it's a free band practice, okay? And think about it this way. As you're dealing with these difficult personalities, again, it may take a long time to kind of build that trust and that respect, but you'll get there. But as you work along that path, you'll be learning so much about how you think about this problem. And what it will do is it will either convert you into or continue to grow you into an incredibly sophisticated communicator. And that's the kind of goal that we want. And then just evaluate your progress objectively. Like, there's been so many scenarios where I've been through this process and then at one point I've just lost my temper. And I've just said to someone, okay, that's it, we're done here. Like, you're just unwilling to work with us. And I've looked back on that and I've thought, that was the wrong thing. Like, I could have attacked it from another angle. I could have approached it from a different way. And some of you may be saying this, like, well, why put up with this bullshit? Like, why not just tell them to, get lost and get on with it? Well, if everybody did that, we wouldn't have a functioning society. So to me, if we all put a bit of work in, what happens is you build a foundation of trust and respect that then not only handles the short-term situations, but also in the people you're dealing with those difficult people, the majority of people will then actually become considerably easier to work with because they've already got that trust, okay? So I know I covered a lot, and this is kind of a long video. Thank you for watching. I want to say another big thank you to my friends at the Open Org, and have a great day. Bye.